Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to welcome you to this session of the People and Planet United Health Innovation Week. Health Innovation Week is connected to HITLAB. HITLAB is the drivers, the sponsors of New York Health Innovation Week, and are hosting a series of important conversations each day. This is one of those. We're gathering at a moment when the health system is not simply evolving at the margins, but being fundamentally rewired, not only through technology, but through a shift in how we think about care, how we experience it, and how we lead with it. We often speak about innovation as a series of advancements, new tools, new platforms, new capabilities. Yet, what is becoming increasingly clear is that innovation is not the destination, it is the responsibility that comes with it. And nowhere is that more evident than the application of AI. AI is moving quickly from promise to presence. It is now embedded in clinical decision-making, operational workflows, and the way organizations interact with both patients and professionals. But the real question is not what AI can do, it is how we choose to lead with it. Because every advancement creates both friction and flow. Friction in the form of complexity, uncertainty, and trust gaps. Flow in the form of access, efficiency, and new possibilities for connection and care. Our responsibility as leaders is to navigate that tension, to ensure as we build more capable systems, we do not lose sight of the people whose those systems are meant to serve. Healthcare is experienced in moments, not in frameworks, and technology must ultimately serve those moments. I'm honored, I'm pleased to share with you and introduce you to three magnificent people, friends, people who are dedicated to the overall health community. These leaders represent the intersection of technology, innovation, and care delivery. Let me tell you a little bit about them, and you'll understand why this conversation is so important to Health Innovation Week. Sally Ann Frank leads the health and sciences at Microsoft Startups. She works directly with founders and innovators to help new companies scale. She's a leading champion of the health startup ecosystem. She's the leading champion of entrepreneurs who are embracing or introducing us to new technology. She's helping them with capital. She's building partnerships for them, and she's helping them move from idea to real world impact. Sally, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's a thrill. Tom Lawry is the managing director of Second Century Tech, and he's a former Microsoft leader for AI and health. He was the national director of AI for health systems for Microsoft for some years. He's also, by the way, as many of you know, a best-selling author. He might be an actor, by the way, but he's most certainly a best-selling author. And he has 3 books. We're going to talk about books in just a moment, so hold on just a second. And Tom will bring a very clear and pragmatic perspective that AI alone will not transform health. Leadership will. Dr. Kathleen McGrow is the Global Chief Nursing Innovation Officer at Microsoft. As a nurse informatics expert, she brings the essential clinical realities, ensuring that innovation is grounded in the realities of care delivery and truly serves patients and clinicians. Kathleen, welcome. Tom, welcome. It's a thrill to have you here with me and Sally. But before we kick off, I just want to tell our listeners, our audience, that this conversation is particularly important. But also, I highly recommend you follow these 3 experts and actually do more than that. Sally, Tom, and Kathleen have openly shared their knowledge in a series of amazing books. Sally is the author of 2 important books. One, of course, is the Startup Protocol, and the other one is, I think it's called the Unicorn you'll share Sally, Unicorn Protocol. And these are essential learnings, series of expert case studies, reflections from Sally's work with entrepreneurs and startups. Maybe you can hold up these books for a second, Sally.
Sure. So the Startup Protocol is designed for early stage founders to help them go through the process of ideate build, launch, and grow, and hopefully avoid some of the common pitfalls. And then when I finished that one, I realized that the learning wasn't done. So the Unicorn Protocol is really designed for that next stage where you can learn from other unicorn founders. It's kind of 10 case studies and then a wrap up of the common threads through all of these successful startups. All names that you've heard of: Amwell, ADOC, Athena Health, Redox, Amada Health, all the names. But what are their stories and how did they get there and how did they innovate beyond just the technology?
Thank you. Thank you. By the way, and Sally, I own both your books. I don't know if I'll see you in New York City later this week, perhaps tomorrow at the sessions at Microsoft. And thank you for hosting us. We appreciate it, Kathleen and Sally. Thank you very much. And Tom, obviously, you probably carved your name in some place of the building on some wall while, during your many years of tenure with Microsoft. So I have to bring one of my books in and get your signature on it. Tom, you're the author of three best-selling books. Obviously, everybody knows about hacking healthcare. Great title, great book. But you have two other wonderful books and a third on the way. Would you talk to us a little bit about your books?
Yes, and thank you. So quickly, actually, my first book on AI in healthcare was published in 2020, which in AI years was ancient times. And strangely, as old as that book is, it was still the number one best-selling book at HIMSS in Las Vegas last month at their bookstore. So the good news is I've got a second edition of that coming out in the fall. Hacking Healthcare, which there we go, was my second book in 2022 that updated where things stood. My third book, which came out last year, has nothing to do with AI and everything to do with looking at why is it that in America we spend more per citizen than any other country on the planet, and yet by all measures, quality, access, and efficiency, we are dead last compared to every developed nation. And I know, well, we're not supposed to talk about your book, Gil, but I wrote that as a way to say, how do we educate others on what's going on with healthcare and help mobilize all of those who should be out there defining what the system is. And then your book, which came along, mine goes from the high altitude level, yours goes down to very much the bedside of what's happening and what needs to change.
Well,
So those
well,
are my
you've
books.
touched my. I'll just interrupt you for a second, Tom. As the moderator, I have the right to do that and just say that my book is touched by you as well. And I'll just say in acknowledgement to you, it was a privilege to have you write the foreword to that book. And thank you very much for that. And I would just say when I read Healthcare Nation, it was the book I wish I had written, but you beat me to it. So I would recommend that everybody get Sally's books and Tom's books. Kathleen has a very important book because, and I can say that with confidence, Kathleen, because Tom and I have talked often about his experiences as an advisor to health systems and meeting with nursing leaders throughout. And often he shares with me, and I won't share them now, he'll bring them up in our panel. He shares with me stories of nurse leaders, nurses on the floors, their reaction when they hear AI and another brick in the wall. And that deals a little bit with the friction that I think we're going to explore in our conversation. Kathleen, your book, which is Empowering Nurses with Technology, is, I think, a critical book because let's face it, in our health system, who is the backbone of the health system? Who do you really have access to? Who's there when you cry out or hit the button, call button? Nurses, dedicated nurses who enter the profession with a desire to help people at the bedside. So thank you for that. Talk to us a little bit and introduce your book, please.
Sure. Thanks, Gil. Thanks for having me. Empowering Nurses with Technology. It's a practical guide to nursing informatics. And I will say that nurses are the backbone and also the heart of healthcare. And really, there's so much technology in healthcare today that our clinicians have to deal with. Not just AI, it's all the digital technology. It's a significant amount of learning curve that they have. So I was really hoping to kind of target all the clinicians that are out there, all the nurses to really kind of better understand the technologies that are within their clinical environment I talk a lot about nurses, but I know ultimately if we make it better for the nurses, we'll make it better for the patients. And I've been lucky, and I can say I have actually read all of your books that you have. So thank you for sharing all of your wealth of knowledge as well. So, and thanks
Yeah.
for
Well,
having me, Gil.
Dr. McGrow, I acknowledge you and your leadership throughout. I want to jump right into this because we
Can I
have
just say one thing, Gil?
one
One of the
thing.
things, one of the things that was so amazing for me to read Kathleen's book was it gave me such a deep appreciation of like the back office work that nurses
Yeah.
do that seems invisible, that is invisible to us as patients and even innovators in the space. So it was an awakening for me that I really, really valued, and I've read everybody's books too, and I loved them. So, but
Well,
anyway, I wanted to point that out for those that may not have that view of what a nurse's workday looks like. It's super informative.
I think, Sally, that was an important add to the conversation just now. And as I said, I think that Kathleen, nurses need an ambassador inside a mega giant like Microsoft that has so much influence over our society and over our health system. If any of you go to any of the big conferences, whether it's HIMSS or others that I go to, health, you'll see this mammoth a Microsoft exhibit that probably looks like a 40 by 40. That oversized exhibit booth is proportional to Microsoft's voice in the health sector. So thank you, the three of you, currently with Microsoft, esteemed Microsoft alum. It's a thrill to have you here during HITLAB's Innovation Week and on People and Planet United. So let's just begin by grounding this conversation in the present moment. I wanted to start, we'll start with you, Sally, and I wanted to ask a question of you. How do you each see health being rewired today? I mean, what is fundamentally changing in how care is delivered, experienced, and measured? And Tom kind of kicked it off when he wrote that first book in like 2021 or 2020. In tech years or health tech years, that's like we had Abraham Lincoln as our president at that time in terms of health technology. It's a different era altogether. And not to put you on the spot, Sally, but what do you think has fundamentally changed in terms of the rewiring of our health system?
Well, I think we're all at a point where we expect to see technology actually provide not only kind of insights, but improved patient outcomes and frankly, improved margins. Most of our healthcare systems are running on low to zero margins. And the fact of the matter is that we can't sustain that much longer. We also are in this, and everyone knows this, the age of our population is growing and the number of clinicians is dropping. So we need to make sure that our healthcare systems are profitable and sustainable long term, and that's where technology can help. We need to fill the gap between the number of patients that need care and the providers that are available. That fits that gap. And then the other thing, and one of the things I'm really hopeful for, is that we can switch this break fix model into that preventative model that I think we all aspire to. And we're at the point now where we can kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel, but we still have lots and lots of work there. But I think about the rewiring, even bringing the nurses in the way Kathleen's talking about is a rewiring of kind of our traditional systems. And then you add on top of that Copilot Health and all of these other consumer oriented things. And now we're looking at changes in access, changes in information that patients have, and how does that affect the patient journey and outcomes?
That's such a good point. Tom, and just to pick up where Sally has left us at this point, you've often shared with me behind the scenes your conversations with nurses after you've presented, and you're often called upon to be a keynote at many conferences. And then a nurse will come up to you and sort of that person, he or she will express their inner fears about technology. I mean, I would say, and I value your thoughts, technology is, as Sally points out, it has the potential to rewire our system and is, but it kind of also is rewiring the world of work. And what can you share with us about that?
Well, I'd say briefly, I'm going to be a contrarian for a second. I'm not sure if I would say healthcare is being rewired today, or at least yet. I'd say we're seeing things start. Maybe it's being structurally, we're starting to see structural rerouting. But to your point, AI is an amazing set of technologies, done right, can really do a lot to make the systems better, more efficient, higher value. But I spent a lot of time talking about and focusing on what I call the AI leadership imperative. As great as all the technologies are, my view is this: technology starts out as a capital and operating expense. Value comes when leaders know how to drive process change, know how to change the culture, know how to do all these things that bring people along. And to finish my story, I would just say, and you know this, one of my clients, which was one of the major health systems in New York City that was affected by the largest, longest strike in New York history of nurses, I was asked to parachute into New York in December and actually was part of bargaining unit negotiations. I sat in on 2 bargaining sessions with the New York State Nursing Association.
Mm.
And, honestly, I learned a lot. What I learned was, the rationale was not based on logic. It's based on fear. It's based on nurses wondering, asking that classic question of what does this mean to me? And the next day, I was actually doing training for SEIU 1199, one of the largest unions representing nurses. And my best education moment came when a nurse that was in my session raised her hand and told her story. And she basically said, I'm not against AI. I just need to make sure it's not going to take me as a nurse backwards. So I look at all of that, and so much of the cultural side, the upskilling, is something that is not happening to the level it should. So to me, investing in technology automatically means you're investing in people, you're investing in process change, you're investing in culture. That can't happen fast enough.
Wow. Taking sort of a card from where Tom has left us, Kathleen, I want to switch around the question a little bit. It's clear that we're tilting toward AI. That's obvious, and Tom talked about that. Sally talks about the need to create sustainable health systems. But AI isn't for nurses, obviously, from what we just heard. For nurses, it's not an abstract concept. It's a question of who's in charge of the it, and what does the it do to the nursing community? How does it shape both friction and flow across the system? I mean, Tom has mentioned clearly an emotional friction that it can create, but in that emotional friction, that little vignette he shared, there's real life like workflow friction. I mean, what do you hear? What can you share with us in terms of what the nursing community tells you when they hear AI?
So I think there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt. They are utilizing AI, have actually been utilizing AI for a significant period of time. If you think of like machine learning, clinical decision support, they may not always realize that they have been using AI, so they don't necessarily know that. So they need to be educated to what they have been doing. They actually have been utilizing AI. And I think fear, uncertainty, and doubt, one of the biggest ways to combat that is actually education and literacy and explaining it so that they understand it better. I'll say positive. I'm really positive today, and I'm riding a huge high in that I was at the American Nurses Association yesterday at their AI think tank. They had about 100 nurse leaders in the room from across the ecosystem, from education to providers to payers to vendors like myself, EHR vendors, regulatory, the NCSB and NCSBN, which is essentially the body that does the testing for nurses to get licensed, et cetera. And I think what we, really realize is that we need this association to kind of come in and really say that they want to lead this charge. because there is so much confusion. There's been different things that have been released, frameworks from different organizations, not necessarily anything something specific to nursing. I don't know that we need a nursing framework, but we need a framework that is kind of driven by a nursing organization like the NAA, which actually is responsible for certifications and accreditations, to kind of be that, here's what we think we should go. And then how do we look at the different things we need to do as far as work, you had mentioned rewiring. So my first thought went, how do we rewire the care team? It's not necessarily technological, right? How do we redevelop how the care team is working and functioning? And then how do we prepare our nurses to leverage the technology, right? Not necessarily just AI, but if you think about all the equipment that's in the patient's rooms, et cetera, how do they learn to utilize that technology? And then that technology that does have AI in it, how do they understand it? And how is it not a black box? So they understand it and clearly can articulate what it does and feel comfortable with it. And that's how we're going to combat the fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Oh, wow. I'm looking at the connection, Kathleen, between you and Sally in terms of your roles. On one hand, you're the ambassador to and from the nursing community. And Sally is the Microsoft ambassador to entrepreneurs and startup leaders. And, and Tom is the bridge because he is sort of like so the confessor. They feel that they can come to him and bare their soul, and he's feeding that back to us right now. Sally, I've got to ask, in your role as really the nurturer of entrepreneurs and startups, do you speak to them about the friction? Like, I think every new idea, every new innovation creates strife for the health community. In other words, yes, saves money, can save lives. Now go off and learn it and figure out how it plugs into the system. You're in that role right now. When you hear what Tom has just shared and Kathleen has just shared, I know that you feel like the weight's on your shoulders, the responsibility for the community to get it. But can you bring us inside some of those conversations for a moment when you're saying you're in the room, the door is closed, you've got your startup community there. Do you ever sort of say, hey, folks, let me tell you, I think all your ideas are brilliant, and here's what you need to consider?
Yes, it's a big topic, and I know we don't have a lot of time, but some of the things that we talk about, and I think this goes really a lot to some of the concepts that Kathleen and Tom were talking about, is that you can't just come in and say, here you go, this is going to help you. It's got to be more about helping them with change management, helping them with training, helping them understand not only the value of it, but how it's going to make their lives easier. And it has to make their lives easier. If there's a workflow with 15 steps, show them how it's going to make that 15-step workflow 5 steps or 7 steps. So it's all about the value proposition and making that come to life in actuality. If we look back, I know we talked about the history. If we look back just 2 years ago to 2024, we often talk about 2024 being the year of AI experimentation, 2025 being the year of implementation of pilots. And now we're at the point where really show me the money. Like, how is this actually going to do something better for me, cheaper, faster? And I don't want to take your guidance on this. Show me how you're going to make this easier by working with my team, by integrating with my team and helping us deploy it in a quick, safe, secure way. And don't expect me to do pilots on point solutions. Tell me how it's going to integrate with the systems we're already using. Tell me how it's going to make my life better, how it's going to make the patient's life better. And I think if we look at kind of this, startup predisposition to saying this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, it's like, I don't need my bread sliced. I've got a knife. Like, tell me more. Tell me something that I can't live without. Make it so meaningful and the documentation behind it, the clinical validation or the ROI calculation, so compelling that I will actually change what I'm doing now because I see value here. And I think that tends to be overlooked because the startups often think it's evident to me. Why isn't it evident to you? Well, it's like, because I'm already doing a job and you're asking me to do another job by integrating this solution. So make it easy, make it a fait accompli because it is exactly what they need through documented clinical validation, integrating with workflows and operating systems that they already have, and being really crisp on the value proposition.
Sally, I'm gonna take something you just said and ask Tom this question. Um, you have a large startup community that you facilitate. And I've had the privilege of seeing you in action. I've had the privilege of meeting many of the outstanding companies that you champion. And then obviously, I'm a voracious reader. Um, I love Tom's first book. I love Tom's second book. I actually keep Hacking Healthcare close by in my home office. I like to refer to it to Tom. It's still a very relevant book. And Tom, I wanted to pick your brain for a second on this. There are, and you go to HIMSS, I go to HIMSS, Kathleen goes to HIMSS, Sally, we're all at HIMSS, and there are so many companies on the exhibit floor, and so many companies who are there, and hundreds of them seem to do the same thing. So I wanted to get your real life impression right now. You know, when it comes to Office Suite software, Microsoft, for instance, plays a very critical societal role. And why? It's kind of created a harmony of tools that we rely on. Um, the hospital system is a very fragmented business. I think the expression goes, and Kathleen can validate this or not, when you've met one hospital system, you've met one hospital system. I mean, I'm in New York City. If I go to NYU Langone, and then I go a little uptown to Mount Sinai, and then I go crosstown to Columbia Presbyterian, I'm like at three different planets altogether. It's different. Uh, Tom, do you think that all these ideas and all of these companies, it's like the proliferation of ideas, the proliferation of companies, is that creating more friction for the system to decide which one do we choose? There seems to be so many puppies in the window.
Well, I would redirect that a little bit. I think it's creating more noise than friction. Again, if you want to know what the hot topic is in any given year, to your point, walk through the exhibit hall at HIMSS. Large vendors and small will have whatever that is plastered on their booths, which does create a lot of noise and a lot of confusion. And then to riffing on what Sally said, even if technology is shown properly set up to work exactly as the salespeople said it would, that alone does not drive value. That's where, to me, any technology investments, you should look at it starting out as a capital and operating expense. The value comes when you start doing all of the things that Sally mentioned. And in my advisory work with my clients, there are certain things. I mean, the reality is the graveyard of healthcare innovation is littered with hundreds and hundreds of AI pilots, including many that actually showed it did produce value in the pilot. But when you put it out in the wild in any of those systems you just mentioned, and you look at the lack of repeatability, even in 3 organizations, that's where the challenge comes when it comes to value at scale. So the things I push as a forcing function my clients to look at on any pilot is, who owns success? What are the metrics of what success looks like? Who pays for this at full deployment? But more importantly, and Sally mentioned it, whose workflows change? How do they change? Who's managing responsibility for that, which is a process improvement initiative, it's culture. And most importantly, are the people who are forced to change ready? Are they actually embracing it because they let it? And after all of that is addressed, then you start looking at how does the technology actually work? But it's amazing how that's often inverted, where people lead with the technology, which totally misses the point of how you drive value at scale across an enterprise.
Wow. Wow. Kathleen, you're kind of where the rubber meets the road. It's you're the advocate within the system, for the system within Microsoft. And nurses are as close to the patient and the system as you're going to get. I mean, they're having to write in everything, every patient reaction, have to alert doctors who are, sort of walking the floor to get over to floor 9, room 3B. I mean, the weight is on their shoulders nonstop. Sally and Tom have talked about the reality of this, the desire to do good, the reality of trying to do good, and then living the reality of good and not so good. Would you mind, after we've just heard Sally and Tom, reflecting a little bit about how the nurse community operationalizes some of this, because they're kind of at the nexus of clinical care meets administration. Most of AI today is really used in the hospital system for administration efficiency. It's not really used for clinical efficiency yet, but yet nurses are the ones who are responsible for executing. What's it like in the day of a nurse, hearing about all these new ideas coming through the pipeline and saying, I imagine, oh my goodness, not another.
Yeah, it's very confusing for them. It is kind of the Wild West. They have a lot coming at them. They have tools that may not even be sanctioned by an organization that they're exposed to, and then the other tools that the organization wants to roll out. So it's really kind of mind-boggling just the amount of burden it imposes on them. And I think we have to, be aware of that. The other thing is when you're talking about any type of bringing in any type of new technology, you have to look at were the nurses engaged in weighing in what the needs are. And many times they have not been. Something is developed by some developer somewhere that might think they have a couple subject matter experts that give them feedback, and then the organization might decide to deploy it and say, okay, nurses, here we're going to train you and educate you on this, but the nurses may have not been able to weigh in on how it really would impact their workflow. I do think we are seeing more I'll say clinical use cases of AI. I think we're starting to move that way. Obviously, I think most organizations started on the administrative side because it is seems a little less risky than doing clinical care. But I am working with organizations that their nurses are building agents, actually hands-on in Copilot Studio, and it's really cool to see a nurse like say, I have this idea for an agent that can really help me with this problem I'm trying to solve. The nurse really understands the problem the best. I think that's part of it is people bring technology in and don't necessarily really truly understand that problem from, the whole problem holistically. And yeah, I've seen nurses actually open up Copilot Studio and build their own agent. And that's really exciting to see because they can see what they're building, they understand it because they see what's kind of in that process, as well as how the agent is working and what data the agent is utilizing to kind of help them through that process and automate some of the things that may really be a burden for them in their workflow. So I don't know that we're going to see every nurse build an agent, but the few that I have seen do it, I think it is a positive sign that nurses really want to be engaged in this process and weigh in on how they're being impacted with their workflows and with the job they need to do every day with their patients.
It's so fascinating you say that. I often meet, and I'm sure Sally does as well, startup companies that talk about, Dr. So-and-so from such and such an institution is on our advisory board, and Dr. So-and-so loves this, can't wait to get this into, their department. And they're like, Dr. So-and-so. And yet I know that often the chief of nursing, particularly with acquisition of new technology, has the budget. The Dr. So-and-so doesn't have the budget. And yet I've just come to realize in listening to you, Kathleen, that rarely, maybe never in many years in talking about health information technology, have I heard an entrepreneur, a startup company say, we're working with the nursing community of hospital such and such, and they've been advising us of how this sort of seamlessly moves into their workflow. I like to consider myself a good listener, but I haven't heard that yet. And Sally, I just want to turn to you for a second, listening both of us to Kathleen right now. You're such a wonder with companies. You're such a great champion for them. Do you hear for sometimes what I hear, Dr. So-and-so loves this, but you never hear that Dr. So-and-so also has an RN. They're a doctor of nursing as opposed to a doctor of something else.
Yeah, it was fascinating. It was one of the takeaways I took from the health what was it, the nurse hackathon that we did.
Yeah,
And
Nurse Hack for Health.
it was first of all the first hackathon I'd ever done, and it was a bunch of nurses who used prototyping tools to come up with a problem, and in 4 hours showed us like a mock-up of those solutions. And it was so interesting to not only see that process but to hear what's important to them and to hear how they think about problem solving and applying technologies to that problem. And it's so very different than what I typically hear. And yes, it's not a it's not a perspective we often get. So it was really great to hear this whole concept about, well, if you really want to be good at what you're doing and really want to build something that's of value to hospital systems, have the nurses involved. And that was one of the big takeaways I took from that experience.
That's right. Yeah, and just Tom, as always, you've always talked to me about your meeting with nurses. I just realized, and listening to Kathleen and now listening to Sally, you're constantly speaking to me about nurses. I never hear you going into hospital systems and say, "Hey, I met with the Department of Cardiology, and doctors so and so and so and so was saying to me, this." It's always nurses. Why?
Well,
We're giving
would have the answer, Gil.
homage to Kathleen
No,
and the nursing community today.
here's what I would say. One, in my view, nurses will be more impacted by how AI changes core processes than anyone else, including doctors. I'm an advisor. I'm on the advisory board of the AMA. Some of those doctors don't like me saying that, but I believe nurses are more impacted than any other group. Two, the conversations we're having about nurses in this talk today, can be applied to doctors, to frankly every other knowledge worker in a healthcare setting. And as I'm listening to the conversation, to me, the number one proxy measure for whether this is being done right. And oh, by the way, studies show, even if you're making great investments in AI, the number one impediment to success value at scale is resistance of the workforce. And in my view, it's not their fault. So the number one thing I look for when I first go in as an advisor is to look at from the perspective of those on the front lines. Do they feel AI is being done with them or to them? And when you understand that, it speaks volumes to what leaders need to be doing. And at the end of the day, the other thing I often look at when I start advisory work is to get a sense of the C-suite and where they stand with their view of AI. And, if they see it mainly as a technology initiative, their path of activities and investment will be very different than, to me, done right, AI is not about technology. It's about empowerment. It's about empowering every knowledge worker to be better at the things they care about. You do that right, whether it's fulfilling the mission or increasing shareholder value, that's where the magic happens. But it's amazing to me how many leaders start looking at this as a technology play.
Kathleen, I think that you've had two amazing ambassadors with you on this panel. That was not how we thought about this starting out, but we've clearly heard the power of nurses in the AI conversation. And I wanted to ask you a pointed question, which is, do you think that some of the friction or the extensive friction we're seeing when we talk about AI in the health system is created because we are neglecting to bring in a primary audience, the nurse community, right up front when we're talking about innovation in the system? Is that a message that every single company involved in health information needs to get right? Like bring nurses into the conversation from the beginning?
Yes. The short answer is yes. You need to engage with your clinical end users, your nurses, early in the process, be iterative with the process, take their feedback and take it seriously and make the changes that they make as far as the recommendations that they make and make those changes. Because to Tom's point, you're going to have a real difficult time with any type of implementation or rolling out or adoption if you do not include them early.
This is
And
great.
I just believe really strongly that that's really the crux of many issues. I will go so far as to say, as a clinician, back when, because to me this is somewhat similar to the electronic health record kind of, implementation back in the late 90s. I was a clinician, and IT came in and said, we're here to implement this electronic health record. And I was a trauma nurse, and we all said, we're here for life or limb threatening injuries. You tell us what we need to do and we'll do it. We abdicated a lot of power, Gil, a lot to the IT, to information technology. And we know that when someone has power, knowledge is power, and they don't want to give it up. And now we're in a situation where clinicians are saying, we want to weigh in and we want to be participatory in this. And it's kind of difficult because we were not necessarily participatory during that boom of electronic health record implementation.
Just say that no. I have 3 Microsoft Surfaces here, but it's not a plug for Microsoft, nor for our audience did Microsoft sponsor this session, not at all. But I will say that I've been impressed that Microsoft brings in so many clinicians into leadership roles to sort of stimulate conversation like this. We just have 3 minutes left. It's hard to believe in a blink how our time passed. So I want to go back to something that we started with, and I want to ask each of you a very sort of like direct question, which is, why buy your book? Why buy your book? If you're at the HIMSS newsstand, obviously Tom wants us to know who's the #1 leader in book selling at the HIMSS newsstand. We pay you homage, sir. But each of you have amazing books. I've seen them. I've gone through them. I've read them. Sally, why buy your book?
Well, if you're a founder and you want to accelerate your growth, they're easy reads, they're fast, and you'll learn a lot, not necessarily from me, because I talk about others and how they've innovative beyond their technology into innovative business models and hiring practice and compensation and all of that. And so it's just an eye opener and a way to think about your business in another way.
Yeah, and I'll just add, for readers of Sally's books, one of the great aspects is the voices of real live entrepreneurs are embedded in her narrative, and you get a chance to read the sort of case studies that you won't see at a major conference or read in a newspaper, where people bare their souls. Tom, which book should we read first is the question, I guess, I give to you. I mean, I have my favorite.
I would say wait until fall when the second edition of AI and Health comes out. But no, seriously, I've had the privilege of working with really great people and many years at Microsoft around the world on analytic projects. And what I would say is, today there are many, many, AI cheerleaders. I am an AI realist. I've had the privilege of working on a lot of projects. More projects with analytics initially fail before they succeed, and you probably learn more by those failures than the successes. And, my books, my articles, my social media posts are all about saying, how do we cut through the hype? If you're in healthcare, in any role, clinical, business, what do you need to do to know how to start navigating the changing world that AI is driving to produce not only good for the organization, but basically future-proof your own career? And it's just a lot of things that I've learned through the years, including a whole lot of chronicling of the scar tissue of doing this for a long time.
So I would just say, read Tom's books if you want to keep your job, because he's giving you the clue to a happy longevity in your position. And Tom, thank you. You have great books. Kathleen, your book, I can tell people why they better buy it, because the nurse, first of all, is really at the core of the health system, and is the core to patient care, and is really the one who is the lighthouse, the the sort of the watch guard over the patient. Nurses have to feel comfortable with technology, and you, from a person who's embedded in one of the great technological sort of drivers of society, are offering your wisdom on that. But in a sentence or so, tell us why we should buy your book, though we know we should buy your book.
Thanks, Gil. I think it's really the bringing together of nursing science and information technology as a primer, especially if you're looking to really see how nurses interact within the systems today. And I do have a chapter in AI, but that's just one chapter. I have, many other chapters that I think are really key to technology in healthcare today and how nurses react and respond to it. And thank you for that. I take great pride in raising the voice of nurses inside a large hyperscaler. That is
As you should, and we should.
I try very strongly to do. Yes.
Well, we're appreciative to you for doing that, and obviously you're with a company that appreciates that as well. I want to thank the three of you. I just want to say we've just gotten a primer, an excellent primer of how entrepreneurs and startups, health innovators can reduce friction as they move along the path to innovation that can sustain and save people's lives. Obviously, innovation can't do its best work unless it's implemented and embraced within a health system. And I think the three of you have just given us some very good reasons and very good watch out fors in pursuing that vision. So thank you, Sally. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you. I know that you're leaving our session now to run and do an update, of course, on the new CPR regs. And I want to thank you for constantly keeping your professional clinical level at the tip top. I hope that you never have to practice on me. However, I know I feel more confident that just in case I'm at a conference with you and I pass out, you'll have your fingers on my pulse.
100%.
And I'll know. Thank you all.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Let's continue with the next session, but let's stay in touch, of course, with Sally, Tom, and Kathleen.
Thank you, Gil.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gil.